To all those who are watching, welcome. Our session today will be on polycentric governance climate change policies, and our presenter today is Leslie Hernandez Gorgona. Leslie is a Rural Studies PhD candidate in the School of Environmental Design and Rural Development at the University of Guelph. Her research interest is in governance in the forest sector and its contribution to community development and climate change mitigation. She worked for 5 years as an official of the state government in Quintana Roo, Mexico, where she developed rural policy and managed programs for sustainable use of natural resources and capacity development. She contributed to the readiness process of REDD+, which is reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation in Quintana Roo. Leslie has additional work experience as a municipal government officer, consultant, and professor at the college level. She has a master's in planning and regional development as well. I am now going to pass it on to our presenter, Leslie.
Good morning. Thank you for joining me today in discussing the polycentric approach in climate change policies. I'm going to start talking about the outline of the presentation for today. First, I'm going to start talking about the polycentric approach in climate change, a little bit about the theory of polycentric governance and how it is used to address climate change issues. Then I'm going to speak about a case study that I used for my doctoral thesis to make an example about how polycentric governance is used in climate change policies. This case is the implementation of REDD+ in Mexico. And then I'm going to propose some recommendations for decision makers when using the polycentric approach in climate change policy. Finally, we will have some time for questions and answers. Also, throughout the presentation, I have some links that you can go to if you want to know a little bit more about the topics that I am presenting. So you will have the presentation. You can take a time to go and use these links that I am giving you. Okay, let's start with the definition of polycentric governance. Polycentric governance is a form of decision-making that involves multiple levels of authority and multiple sectors representatives under a shared system of rules to regulate their relationships. Polycentric governance was first used in the 50s by Michael Polanyi. This researcher used the concept to address abstract issues linked to freedom of expression and ideological diversity in science, law, arts, and economy. Then in the 60s, Vincent Ostrom also used the polycentric approach, but this time to address practical issues, such as governance in metropolitan areas. Later on, Elinor Ostrom and other researchers in the University of Indiana also used the polycentric approach in common pole resource management. These researchers had the goal of trying to provide efficient production and provision of public and collective goods through the polycentric approach. And finally, in the first decade of this century, Elinor Ostrom explicitly proposed the polycentric approach as an effective approach to address global environmental problems such as climate change. This researcher proposed that international agencies are not the only relevant actors when addressing climate change, but also smaller scale governance units should be also taken into account. Okay, so currently there are multiple stakeholders taking part in climate action. According to the Global Climate Action Portal in 2018, there was a large number of cities, regions, private companies, civil society organizations that have made commitments to act on climate change in themes such as land use, ocean and coastal zones, water, energy, and transportation. For example, you can go to this portal and see what all the countries are doing. And we have here Canada. Canada has 156 stakeholders representing 361 actions that are in the portal. Another example of polycentric approach in climate change policies is the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Road and Climate Change. This framework has 4 main pillars, which are pricing carbon pollution, complementary measures to reduce emissions, adaptation and resilience building, innovation, clean technology, and job creation. It expresses the polycentric approach as the federal government has committed to ensuring that the provinces and territories have the flexibility to design their own policies to meet emission reduction targets. The federal government has also committed to work with provinces and territories to complement and support their actions without duplicating them, and also strengthening the collaboration between the government and indigenous people on mitigation and adaptation actions based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. Here is another example of a local action in climate change organized by a civil society organization. This happened a couple of weeks ago here in Guelph, and it was a tree planting event. There were several or multiple citizens volunteering in this activity. And also this beautiful girl is my daughter. As you saw, current global climate change mitigation and adaptation policies are polycentric because they include different levels such as local, regional, national, and international, and different sectors. This is public and private sectors, NGOs, academia, local communities. They promote the creation of institutional arrangements with common goals. For example, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is an international institutional arrangement where countries get together to discuss and negotiate climate change action and mechanisms. But there are other institutional arrangements at national or even sub-national level. And there is an internationally agreed common goal, which is limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees. However, the effectiveness of polycentric governance implementation can be a subject of debate. This is, we can't guarantee that because we are involving multiple stakeholders, there will be a good quality of governance or a positive impact in the achievement of goals. So based on the literature, I developed a model to assess the quality of governance in climate change policies based on different functions. These functions are actors' participation and their influence in decision making, information sharing, knowledge exchange, financial cooperation, conflict resolution, and creation of trust. It is also important not only to know the current state of these functions, but also to know if they have improved or declined over the time. And also important is to know if the quality of governance is having an impact on that goals achievement. So this impact can be negative, neutral, or positive. So using this model, I assessed the quality of governance and the impact in the achievement of goals for the implementation of the RED+ mechanism in Mexico. So a little bit about REDD+. First of all, REDD+ stands for Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation. The plus sign is related to the conservation of forest carbon stocks, sustainable management of forests, and the enhancement of forest carbon stocks. And more recently, this mechanism has included non-carbon benefits, such as economic, social, cultural, and environmental benefits other than carbon emission reduction. REDD+ was first introduced in 2005 as a mechanism for climate change mitigation that provides incentives for forest conservation in developing countries. The plus sign was added in 2010, and in 2015, the international negotiations centered in safeguards for local people, having the non-carbon benefits that I explained before, and a non-market approach. This means that countries that don't want to sell carbon credits, they can also get financial support to conserve their forest area. And currently, REDD+ is a main element in the climate change agenda, as it was defined that natural climate solutions can deliver 30% of the solutions to climate change. There are 65 countries that are partners with the United Nations REDD+ program. These countries are in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And as I told you before, my research has focused in Mexico. Mexico has been a pioneer in REDD+ implementation. The country has concluded the National Strategic Plan, has had its emission reduction program approved, and is one of the 4 countries negotiating result-based payments with the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility. Mexico also was the first country launching an online fully operational safeguards information system, and it has implemented REDD+ early actions, which are like pilot projects in 5 states from 2012 to 2017. But most importantly, such as we discussed for the Pan-Canadian framework, the Mexican government has also explicitly stated that REDD+ is or should use the polycentric approach. They define REDD+ as an interinstitutional and cross-sectoral coordination policy to reduce deforestation and forest degradation through sustainable rural development. So here it is interesting to define or to identify if the policies are really being followed when implementation is practiced. So Mexico has a REDD+ system that includes 3 levels, so the national level, the state level, and the local level. My research has focused in the state level, using as a study area the state of Quintana Roo. I interviewed members of the Technical Advisory Council, which are sectors representatives, members of the work group that are government officers from federal, state, and municipal government. And I also interviewed community members, which in Mexico are called ejidos. Ejidos is a form of organization where communities collectively own land and natural resources, and they can decide and get benefits from the use of natural resources. So, for example, in Mexico, 60 to 80% of the forest areas are owned by these ejidos, by these community organizations. The study area, as I told you, is the state of Quintana Roo, which is in southeastern Mexico. Quintana Roo has 85% of the state surface covered by tropical rainforest. Quintana Roo is also one of the 5 Mexico's REDD+ early action states, and it has also the instruments needed for REDD+ implementation. Just for context, Cancun is right here, so Quintana Roo is the state where Cancun is. But as you can see, the REDD+ intervention area is the largest part of the state, and it is very forested and also very rural. The data collection was done from July to October 2018, and as I said, I conducted key informant interviews to members to the REDD+ work group, the REDD+ advisory council, local community leaders and members. If you remember this model, I'm going to start talking about each one of the functions and the results that I found in my research. So for actors' participation and their influence in decision making, I found that the most influential actors in Quintana Roo's REDD+ planning and implementation process were the State Ministry of the Environment and the National Forest Commission. Here are some quotes of my interviewees. One interviewee said, agencies directly involved in, these agencies are the agencies directly involved in the forest sector. One other interview said that there must exist leadership to guarantee operability and order. However, sector representatives did not believe they were influencing decision-making. This fact caused lack of motivation to continue participating in REDD+ activities, as some of the interviews expressed. One person said, we have not been able to do anything but listening and give opinions on the work that has already been done. Another person said, what ended the motivation was that they, the government, were using us just to validate things. I also found that local communities were not engaged in REDD+ planning and decision making. They were only recipients of training, technical support, and funding for REDD+, or for, in general, for forest management and conservation. For information sharing, I found that the group meetings and online mechanisms such as websites, email, Dropbox were the main tools for information sharing among stakeholders. This function was pretty well functioning. The majority of the interviewees think that there is a good amount of information shared among stakeholders, but most of the participants mentioned that they didn't know if deforestation has reduced in Quintana Roo, for example. One interviewee said, this topic, talking about REDD+ and climate change, we need to share the information with local people, but we have to do it constantly. Otherwise, you tell them about it today, and next year they won't remember it. So this is kind of a recommendation from this person, saying that it is not enough to have information in a website, for example. It is important to keep reinforcing the information among the local people and other stakeholders. Some participants also expressed concern about the use of technology as the primary tool for communication. One participant said, first of all, I don't know how to use internet. There is internet in my community, but other communities don't have it. This thing, referring to a smartphone, I barely know how to use it. My grandson is 12 years old. He knows how to use this thing, the smartphone. But they, young people, are not connected to social issues. So I think this quote is very interesting, and it highlights two topics. First of all, the access to internet is not always the problem. As this gentleman said, he has access to internet in his community, and he also owns a smartphone. The issue here is that he doesn't know how to use it, or he's not used to use this tool to get information. And another important thing to highlight in this quote is that young people are more comfortable using technology. So this is an opportunity to connect young people to social issues by helping, let's say, the older generation to get used to the internet or computers or smartphones. So this is very interesting how these two generations could work together with something that is important for both of them. For knowledge exchange, there were multiple knowledge exchange examples, such as courses, workshops, training sessions, sharing of good practices or successful stories, field trips, publications, development of strategies, plans, and new methodologies. Most of these opportunities were organized by the federal government and NGOs. Sector representatives and community members participated in these activities. So here is an example that one of my interviewees told me about. We wanted to bring the experience from Jalisco, which is another state in Mexico, related to the coordinated work between environmental agencies and agricultural agencies. They are implementing mechanisms to support farmers that want to have cattle herding areas, but also conserve forest areas. As a result of this exchange, we could work together in a similar project in Quintana Roo. Another example is here. It says, before RED Plus, we created an agroforestry model that was very fitted for implementation. The model that we developed was adopted by the National Forest Commission. The officers saw value in it and integrated it into the RED Special Program. We were able to improve the model and use it in other communities. So these two examples, you can see that it is important to learn from other actors. This knowledge exchange can provide this opportunity to learn from the experiences of other actors in the same region or even in other regions or countries. And this can help the implementation of the policies and make them a little bit faster, probably. You don't need to wait until experimenting about a specific policy or program. You can take the experience from other stakeholders and implementing in your own region or country. Talking about financial coordination. So financial coordination has happened in very few and specific cases in Quintana Roo. Usually, agencies at the different levels work with their own assigned budget, including RED Plus funds, which were assigned to the National Forest Commission. Sector representatives and local communities have not engaged in any joint investments. Instead, they were recipients of financial support from other entities. However, both sector representatives and local communities, they invested their own resources, like time or travel expenses, to go to meetings or to go to RED Plus related activities. So even if they have not invested money, they are investing time and a little bit of money in travel expenses. Some of the interviews explain this function. One of them said, the National Institute for Social Economy, this is an example of how they work together in financial coordination. The National Institute for Social Economy provided funds for community enterprises to build infrastructure such as electrical fences. The National Forest Commission provided tree plants for feeding cattle and creating green fences. The Federal Ministry of Agriculture provided funds to buy cattle in the first year. So this was one of these few specific cases where several agencies designated funds to implement a program. Another example, they just approved 7.5 million pesos for Red Cross. This money comes from Norway and will be assigned to the Nature Conservancy in Mexico. The state government will have a saying in how to apply it. So there are some international funds, but usually these funds are also assigned to one specific actor or agency, in this case the Nature Conservancy, which is a very well-known NGO. So that this is what usually happens with Red Cross funds. They are assigned to one specific actor or agency. However, one interviewee said that the platform and the legal framework for financial coordination already exists. There is the Peninsula de Yucatan Fund, which is a trust fund for receiving financial resources. So this is a fairly new fund, and probably in the future, these funds, like the Norway donation, instead of going to an NGO, could go to this fund. That's the intention of this fund, to receive financial support from international agencies or even donations from the private sector. So some of the interviews were optimistic about this fund that will encourage financial coordination. Conflict resolution. So when discussing this function, the interviewee said that discussion in meetings until reaching consensus was the main mechanism for solving conflicts or potential conflicts. Some interviewees said, if there are disagreements, we discuss them and we solve them in the group. Each one has their own viewpoint, but that is precisely the objective of having a work group, to hear the voices so we can move forward. Sector representatives and local community leaders also said that rallies, protests, and even lawsuits were mechanisms that they can use if needed, but so far they have not done any of these related to Red Cross. The lack of flexibility in the rules of federal programs when applied at local level was mentioned as a potential cause of conflict between the government and the sector representatives. One interviewee said that most agencies have the argument that the rules of programs are written in central offices and cannot change. Then, if they cannot change, what is the point of discussing about that? They say we will change it next year, and they never change it. So even that the institutional arrangements have provided a forum for discussion and to solve potential conflicts, there are still some topics that are unaddressed, and there is no specific mechanism for solving this type of conflict. In relation to creation of trust, I found two very contrasting situations or scenarios between the government officers and the sector representatives. There was a high level of trust among government officers. One of the interviews said, the work group meetings are meetings among friends. There is willingness to participate. We all know each other very well. The decisions are made fast and without bureaucracy. In contrast, one sector representative said, let's say that it's difficult to trust the government agencies. There is no trust to outside actors. We should trust them, but it is difficult. Another opinion, which was one of the most, let's say, controversial, this gentleman said there has been a total lack of trust towards the state and federal government in the past 5 years, not because of Red Cross, but in general. We have zero trust on the governor, zero trust on the government officers, zero trust on the federal government and its representatives. So this lack of trust, I found it not only in the Mexican case, but when analyzing REDD+ implementation in other countries through a literature review, I also found that it was very common that local actors were usually, they didn't trust external actors, not only government officers, but also NGOs staff, for example. So it is very common to have this lack of trust between local people and external actors. For the impacts on the achievement of goals in my case study, I'm not going to talk a lot about it because I would have to talk about tree cover laws and statistics, and it would be a little bit long for today. I'm just going to give you the conclusions. What I did for this part is to analyze quantitative data from the Global Forest Watch, the National Institute of Statistics and Geography in Mexico, and the National Council of Evaluation of the Politics for Social Development. What I found here is that REDD+ has had neutral impact in halting tree cover loss in Quintana Roo. Although tree cover in the REDD+ intervention area has maintained over the years, there is no strong evidence that REDD+ has contributed to it. So Quintana Roo is a state where people have been involved in forest management for at least 30 years. So it seems that REDD+ is just one of the many other mechanisms to conserve and sustainably manage forests in Quintana Roo. It seems to be helping or contributing, but as I said, there is no strong evidence that it has been a difference from what was happening before REDD+ and what is happening when implementing REDD+. It can also be that REDD+ implementation has been going on for only 5 years, so maybe it is a very short period to really know if REDD+ is influencing the maintenance of tree cover loss. So probably in the future we will have more data to have an assessment of this situation. In terms of generating socioeconomic benefits for local people, REDD+ also has had a neutral impact. However, REDD+ did not compromise the access to land and forest products. Local people in Quintana Roo continue to generate income through sustainable timber exploitation, beekeeping, charcoal production, and agriculture, among others. So this is important because sometimes in other countries, REDD+ has had a very conservationist approach with a tendency to restrict local people from utilizing forest products. This has not been the case in Mexico and not in Quintana Roo, so local people can still benefit from the forest products. And before going to the recommendation part of the presentation, here are some pictures of my fieldwork last summer. Those are some communities in Quintana Roo that I visited. I saw their forest operations, their tree nurseries. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there is also a picture in the bottom of a charcoal storage in one community. So all these actions are managed and led by community members and community leaders. And now let's discuss some of the recommendations that I am proposing based on my own research and also based on the literature. For actors participation and influence in decision making. In practice, having one or two leading actors is needed to keep moving forward in climate change decision making and implementation. However, the leaders need to keep other actors engaged and motivated by defining together clear strategies and action plans in which every actor has a task. Allowing actors to have a say in decision making is another way to keep them engaged. For information sharing, for adequate information sharing, the tools that can be in-person fora, online resources, radio broadcasts, printed material, those tools are important, but to have a clear message that can be an action plan, the progress that is being made, the challenges that are being faced. All this information is really more important than the actual tools that we are using to share this information. For knowledge exchange, sharing successful stories and best practices is a way to build in past experiences, avoid mistakes, and keep moving forward in meeting targets. As we discussed when I presented the examples, learning from the experiences of other actors is very important and very useful when implementing climate change policies. For financial coordination, this function is critical to multiply efforts and avoid duplicating activities. Investing in capacity development for local governments and organizations might also lead to a better and faster result. For conflict resolution, actors working together to solve a problem, climate change in this case, have usually a good attitude towards each other, and they usually reach consensus when making decisions. However, internal rules are needed to solve potential conflicts. So regardless of the good attitude of all the actors, there can always be conflicting interests. So that is why it is important to have internal rules when working within an institutional arrangement. And for creation of trust, this is a very subjective value, but it can be promoted by assuring transparency in decision making and implementation. And also regular meetings or other activities might also help people to get to know and trust each other. We can't forget that people working in climate change or any other issue, before being a government officer or a sector representative, they are people, right? So just the opportunity to talk to each other and to start knowing each other is important to build this trust. And finally, for the impacts, also promoting all the functions explained before might lead to high quality governance. It might not result in a positive impact in the achievement of goals as expected. Efforts to create functional institutional arrangements, such as working groups or councils or committees, might exceed the actual implementation of strategies and action plans. Decision makers must look for a balance between the policy and the practice. So as we discussed, all the functions, the information sharing, the knowledge exchange, financial coordination, creation of trust and conflict resolution, they might help to improve the quality of the governance, but not necessarily they would lead to a positive impact in goals achievement. So that's why it is important sometimes to invest a lot of resources, this is time and even money, to create functional institutional arrangements, and that takes a little bit out of the efforts to actually implement strategies or programs, in this case for climate change. So that is why a balance between policy and practice is always a good idea. And to finish the presentation, I just want to leave you with a quote of one of my interviewees. This is a community leader in Quintana Roo. And this person said, "For me as a farmer, it is clear. we are living it. We cannot talk about the climate change in the future. It is happening now. We have sporadic isolated rain. I already lost 500 hectares of corn crop. So this quote is important to reflect that climate change issues, we have to address them right now. It is not something that will affect us in the future. There are people that are already being affected by climate change. Thank you for your attention. I just want to leave you my contact information in case you need more information about this topic or you want to discuss Polycentric Governance and climate change policies. You can contact me through email or follow me on Twitter. Thank you very much. Let's go to the question and answers, I think.
Thank you, Leslie, for sharing this information with us. It was very informative. So we do have a question here. So the first question is, I was struck by the quote you shared about young people and technology. As Canada delivers its rural broadband strategy, I'm wondering if you have any results, ideas, or suggestions for the role young people can have to be teachers or leaders in sustainable practices that impact rural communities.
Thank you for the question, Valencia. Yeah, this is a very interesting topic. I am not specifically looking at the role of young people in my research, but I just wanted to identify that topic as a great opportunity for future research or for program implementation. Especially because I realized that this person is right about identifying that older generations don't have, they are not very used to work with technology, but also most of the time young people are not very involved in social issues. So this is a great opportunity for both generations to work together and to bring young people involved in community issues and help the older generation to get engaged in the use of technology.
Thank you. We have another question. The question is, can you elaborate on the balance between policy and practice?
Sure. So what I am trying to say with this balance is that sometimes in climate change policies, a good part of the effort and the resources are designated to build or to reinforce the institutional arrangements. So when you create a work group, sometimes you invest in capacity development for the members, in the logistics for the meetings, in things that are not tangible results of what you want to implement. So I found this in the literature review that I did for RED Plus implementation in other countries. And several countries mentioned that actors felt that a lot of resources were designated to make the institutional arrangements work, and resources never got to communities to implement actual projects. So that is why I am proposing to find a balance. So sometimes, of course, the institutional arrangements are needed, but sometimes we have to learn when to say this is enough. We had made enough effort in trying to make this work group or this council work, but we also need to focus in tangible and specific actions in the field, in the community. That is, I don't know if that answers a little bit the question.
Thank you. We have another question that is, was there a specific actor or type of actors that came up as leaders in the quality of governance model as a whole or in its individual components?
Yeah, so in the case of Quintana Roo, the identified leaders were the National Forest Commission, which is a federal agency, and the State Ministry of the Environment. Those were the identified leaders, both from the government sector. And the reason that they are the leaders, or they have been the leaders, is not only, or it is not related to the dominance of the government over other actors, but also to the lack of, maybe to the lack of capacities of the other actors to take a more active role. So in Mexico, there has been a tendency of local actors to remain passive in certain situations and leave the government to take over. The sector representatives and local community leaders, they recognize this situation, and they said, we want to make more influence in decision making, but we also know that we need to participate more, we need to organize more, we need to really step up, and that seems it hasn't really happened in the Mexican case. Or in the state of Quintana Roo. I will say that it is common in Mexico as a country.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. Okay, so we have one question. So that's from Ryan's. He's saying, thanks for the presentation. You mentioned that 4 or 5 states participated in the initial roll out of RED+. Could comment on how were these states selected? Were they highly capacity states?
Yeah, they were selected based on the deforestation rates, their historical deforestation rates. So, for example, those are also some of the states with more forest resources. So, for example, in the Quintana Roo area, there was a very high forest exploitation in the 50s, but from the 80s to the present, people have been practicing sustainable forest management, but because of the historical deforestation rates, they selected these regions. So the other states are Yucatan and Campeche, which are all part of the peninsula, the Yucatan area. They are neighboring states. Then Chiapas it's also a southern state in Mexico, and Jalisco is a state which is in the Pacific coast.
Thank you. There's one more question. The question is, does your research compare Canada to Mexico?
Well, I think that the findings regarding the quality of governance can be translated to any country. I think when actors with different capacities and different interests work together or try to work together, there will always be challenges. So probably the challenges that I found in the Mexican case, in the work group and the advisory council for RED+, probably those challenges can also be found in other similar groups, not only in Canada but in any other country or region. The Pan-Canadian framework for climate change also mentions the idea to create work groups, including stakeholders from different sectors. So they might also face similar issues when working together. So I think the part of the quality of governance can be very much compared or translated to any other country or region that is trying to implement the polycentric approach for climate change or for any other issue.
Thank you. Okay, so I believe these are all our questions. I would like to once again thank you, Lissel, for your great presentation. I would also like to thank the audience for attending the webinar and for their participation. Lissel, do you have any last minute things to add?
Just thank you to everybody for being here for the presentation. And as I said, if you have any more questions or want to chat about anything, feel free to contact me. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Have a great rest of the day, everyone, and thank you for participating.
Thank you. Bye.